my school was not that far actually from a caravan camp with Travellers and probably also Roma. But this also started with Basque Romani because they have a number of names for coins in Basque Romani, and then I saw the same names used also in other varieties of Romani, and I thought, where do they actually come from? I'm pretty convinced that it happened quite suddenly, that people started to change from Romani to this mixed variety. I said, I want to study comparative linguistics. And he said, don't do that.
Welcome to Conversations with Romani Linguists. My name is Anastasiia. I'm an educational influencer and promoter of the Romani language.
And I'm Yaron. I'm a linguist and I specialize in the study of the Romani language.
In this series of interviews, we talk to linguists working on the Romani language. We are eager to know how they became interested in specialized research on the Romani language, what challenges they faced on their professional path, and what fascinating stories and discoveries they had working on the Romani language. Today, we are pleased to introduce our guest, Peter Bakker. Peter Bakker is Associate Professor of Linguistics, University of Aarhus, Denmark. Peter, you're very welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the interview.
Thank you for agreeing to join us to share your experience, and we are glad to have you with us and to have the possibility to speak with you about your work on the Romani language. And before we start our conversation about your work itself, let's go back a bit to your childhood, and could you tell us, please, where you grew up, perhaps some interesting facts about time when you were at school, then perhaps at university?
Okay, well, I was born in Dordrecht, the Netherlands, actually Holland. It's the oldest city in Holland, but that is a little bit misleading because it's not the oldest city in the Netherlands. And I was living in a quite ordinary neighborhood with quite ordinary parents, nothing special. I went to a school where I remember there was a lot of fighting. In my memory, it was every day. That was probably also because not everybody was able to express their feelings and thoughts very well. In fact, also when we talk about Romani, my school was not that far actually from a caravan camp with Travellers and probably also Roma. And sometimes we would go there and look, but it was on the other side of the motorway, so it was a little bit far from where I was living. And they were just there.
What do you mean fighting? It's interesting. Could you clarify this? It's like literally?
Literally fights, yeah. At the schoolyard in the breaks, and I don't even know what it was about. But also one of the things I remember, nobody ever warned not to go to the traveler camps, but there was one neighborhood which was apparently worse than my neighborhood, and they said you should not go there. And I've been there only once, but that was kind of an abduction because I was at the fair, and I was actually quite strong, but I couldn't show it, and I was chosen. I looked weak, so I was chosen to be the one to be beaten up there, and they didn't really succeed, so I had to come with them, and it was the only time I was in that neighborhood. But I don't remember how I escaped from there. But it was, apart from that, it was a normal youth. And then when I finished the elementary school, which was by age 12, I went. Okay, I was reasonably good at school, and my sister was much smarter than me, and she was older, and she was allowed to go to the type of high school where you can go on to university. And all my friends went to a technical school or administrative school, which was probably would have been the fate for me as well, if not my sister had been accepted at this gymnasium, as they call it. So I ended up there, and I finished it in the 6 years required. The good thing was there that for me it was also kind of a culture shock, because I had never met any academics, I think, before I went to that school, and I liked it in a way, but I didn't really do my utmost to get through. But I made sure that I would go to the next year. What was really good at this school was it was small, so everybody knew each other, and there was also an okay social social environment. But we also had 6 languages at school that were obligatory. We had Latin, Greek, German, French, English, and Dutch. And then there were also some people who knew other languages that you could sign up voluntarily. And I also did a couple of classes in Russian and modern Greek until the teacher didn't show up. So that gave me a good basis, and I liked to compare all those languages. And then I had heard that there was a study called Comparative Linguistics. So I thought that is something for me. And my best friend was a drummer in a rock and roll band. And his uncle was a professor in general linguistics. And sometimes when we would go from Dordrecht to the big city where everything happens in Amsterdam, sometimes we would stay at his place. And I remember he asked me, what do you want to become when you are big? I think we were around 15 or something like that, or 16 maybe. And then I said, I want to study comparative linguistics. And then he said, don't do that. That is outdated. You should study general linguistics. That's what I teach. So I listened to him, and but it was only an MA study. So you had to do a bachelor degree first. And I chose for Dutch because I thought that's easy. I already speak that language, but I also found out that you have to read a lot of books in that language, which was kind of a challenge in the sense that I didn't like that part, but I did do it. And then and then there's also an important part. At some point in time, I want to drop out from my studies.
And what is your mother tongue? Sorry, sorry for the interruption. What is your mother tongue? And
Dutch.
Dutch. And what age were you when you started learning foreign languages?
Well, that was in high school when I was 12. Started with Latin and English and French, and then later German and Greek also. But then I wanted to drop out. I was active in politics, grassroots politics, and then I was at the concert of my friend, this rock and roll concert, and there I met this professor again, and of course we recognized each other after so many years. And I say, I think I'm going to drop out. I can't finish this. And then he said, well, you can already start with linguistics in the MA, even though you do not have your bachelor yet. So I did that, and I was completely hooked from the first minute, and I've never been I still love what I do in linguistics. I've tried to work with a wide range of languages of different types, and also in some cases also try to learn to speak the languages, so that I try to have an overview of how languages of the world are like.
How interesting. And how did you get interested in Romani?
Yeah, okay. That was actually I had I wanted to you had to do some minor subjects also when you were doing Dutch and linguistics, and I thought okay, I ended up with Basque because I thought that's the most different language and also the most difficult one. And then I had to write some essays also in my studies, and then I had heard about some Dutch Basque word list from the 1600s. And then I thought, okay, I can write about that. But then my teacher said, no, they are actually Basque Icelandic. And in that, I was also studying Pidgins and Creoles, which are contact languages that emerge when people who do not have a language in common, when they meet, they may make a new language, and that had happened there in Iceland. But they were talking about whales, and I associated them with Canada, so I thought maybe the same thing happened in Canada. And yes, there was also a Basque Amerindian pidgin. And I thought it was so obvious because when they were quoting these people there, I could understand what they were saying because they were ordinary Basque words and not Amerindian words. So I thought somebody else must have discovered that. So I started reading some things about the Basque country, and in one of these books there was a word list of Basque Romani. And in this word list, all the Romani words ended in a, and all the verbs ended in tu. And these are the Basque suffixes that the endings that you use when you cite nouns. It's a, and adjectives actually also a, and verbs end in tu. So I thought, this is really strange. This looks like a kind of a mixture between Basque and Romani. So I started to try and find more sources, and that led also to some contacts with other linguists, and also I did a publication then about Basque Romani.
Actually, it's very interesting. How was it to find, information, literature about Romani, especially in particular case which you needed? Yeah, how was it for you? How easy or how difficult it was, and
it was difficult.
How did you manage?
Yeah, especially at that time when there was no electronics, and you had to go to all kinds of bibliographies and find out what there was, and then try to get the copy and order them from somebody or from some library. And I think I found about 15 to 20 sources, and the authors were there was nobody who knew both languages. Sometimes they knew Basque, sometimes they knew Romani, and sometimes they knew neither, which means that the material is both of bad quality but also good because they're not influenced by their prejudice about what the languages should be like. And this article about Basque Romani was published in a volume that we did it was called In the Margin of Romani, which was quite a marginal publication also. I think we printed only, maybe 30 or 50 copies, and they were sold out within a couple of weeks. But then the paper prices had increased, so we could not print more for the same price. So it's a kind of a collector's item, but it also had an article about Sinti and an overview article about similar varieties of this mixed Romani, which we had found in the Basque Country, where basically the grammatical system is the local language, in this case Basque, but the vocabulary is Romani.
So maybe we can kind of pick up on that now, because that's the main areas, or one important area of your research on Romani. And you and colleagues at the time, when you, by the way, I have a copy, so I'm one of the privileged people who has a copy of that collector item. You named that para-Romani. You and others referred to that kind of mixed language as para-Romani, and you also, as you mentioned, you called the collection in the margins of Romani. So tell us a little bit about how do these kind of varieties emerge? What's the history behind them? You mentioned before pidgins and creoles, they emerge when people don't have a language in common, so they kind of improvise and do a makeshift language. How do these things that are in the margin of Romani, how do they get pushed into the margin, so to speak, or put it in positive terms? How do they emerge, and for what purpose?
Yeah, well, lots of people were there, but there were no, say, academic observers who wrote down what happened. So I'm pretty convinced that it happened quite suddenly, that people started to change from Romani to this mixed variety. And there have been several ideas about that. One idea was that there was a need for a secret language that nobody understands. And if you can speak, say, English with Romani words and you pronounce it as if it's Romani, then people would think, oh, he's speaking English, but I didn't understand it. So you can say something to somebody of your own people, and outsiders would not understand it. So that's one idea.
But why not use Romani then? If you know Romani and people can't understand.
Well, that's impolite, because then people think, hey, they say something which we are not supposed to understand. So they speak English, but suddenly they speak this other language. But if you do it in this mixture, then people could think that you are speaking English. So that's one idea. The other idea is that there was a kind of a shift, maybe because of say, population admixture, that the Roma would be more together with the local people and maybe intermarry, and then have and more and more people would use the local language, and then suddenly people think, oh, we are losing our own language if we are not careful. But at that stage, maybe the younger people did not know enough Romani, but enough of the local language, and by integrating Romani words in the local language, they could continue to speak it, but also express this new identity of a special group. So these are probably the main theories of the genesis of these special varieties.
Mm-hmm. And give us an idea of where are they found beyond the Basque country?
Yeah, well, it's actually most of them are in Western Europe, in England, but not in Wales. Oh, that's not England, but not in the British Isles. England, in Norway, in Sweden, in Catalonia, in Andalusia, in Spain, probably also in Occitan country, and then there are a couple of them also in the east, in Turkey and Greece. I think those are the ones that we. Oh yeah, and Hungary probably also among the Romungros.
And it's been argued that these varieties sort of replace Romani. So a population, you've also suggested that that's one of the possible scenarios to their emergence. People speak Romani, but then they shift to the majority language or the surrounding language, but they hold on to vocabulary in Romani. So it almost seems as though, one comes at the expense or replacing the other, perhaps to compensate. But you've also suggested that they may have coexisted for a while and served different functions. And one of the texts that you use to make that point is a source from England, from I believe the 17th century, right? Called the Winchester Confessions. And do you want to tell us a little bit about what is that source? How did you find it? And what does it represent? What is its meaning?
Well, I don't remember exactly how I found it, but there was a little brochure called the Winchester Confessions published in the UK, and it was somebody who had found this document in the archives in Winchester, and it has it's a document describing some people forging passports and things like that, and there's also a list. This is from, I don't remember exactly, early 1700s, I think. And there's also a word list, a Romani word list in this brochure. And in this word list, there are also a couple of sentences that are that have an English grammatical system, as something like a piece of iron with a point or something like that, and there the preposition and the structure is English, but the words are Romani. So my argument was that it was already there at the time. But this was the person who was apprehended was not a Romani himself. He was an Englishman who had joined them. So it could also be that he had just learned the words and not really the grammatical system. But when we go to the 1800s, there have been some people who have done fieldwork among English Romanis, where they have texts in both something close to Romani as we know it, and also the mixed language. So that is also evidence of coexistence of the two. And I assume that it was not really an age difference if they could have the same people tell stories in what they call Old Romani and New Romani. These were the same people, but they had apparently a different function. But I think you have more outspoken ideas about that, Jaron, than I have.
Yeah, I have some, but I was interested in the Winchester Confessions as with the earlier documents as something that you interpreted.
Yeah.
Well, we mentioned that, again, one of the scenarios for that shift from Romani to so-called para-Romani, leaving the vocabulary but adopting the other language, that may have been connected with intermarriage, you said, and so a change sort of in the composition and one might say the genetic composition of the population. And language and genetics is a hot topic. It's been discussed now for some 30 years. And with the advent of wider scale kind of genome sequencing, quite a lot of people have been interested in a worldwide scale in mapping what we call language genetics, so language families, which is sort of a metaphor that we use in linguistics for related languages, and the real biological genetics of DNA and so on. And this is a topic that's constantly evolving, and we're constantly reading new studies with genetic sampling, and it's very difficult, I think, if you're not a specialist, to understand always the exact coding. But you've done, at some point, you were interested in that, and you did a bit of a survey, right, of some of these studies that looked at genetic linguistics and genetics. So maybe explain, first of all, what is exactly is genetic linguistics, and what can we learn, and what was the outcome at the time? What was your impression of those comparative surveys, and how does the genetics help us understand the genetics of language, so to speak?
Yeah, well, that's of course quite a while ago, and it's if we talk about genetic linguistics, then we also talk about first we have to say that often that is used for talking about languages and their ancestors. So we have a genetic connection between Romani and Sanskrit, for instance, or Indic languages, and there are genetic connection between English and Dutch and Danish. They are Germanic languages. That is genetic linguistics, where you talk about families of languages.
And the criteria for that, of course, is the similarity in structure, right? So the words and the grammar are similar, and that's what we kind of metaphorically call genetic in linguistics, isn't it?
Yes, so the more similar they are, the more closely related the languages are. Yeah, but there's also genetics, and that is basically DNA, and this is quite a while ago. I'm sure that there is a lot more research, but there was amazingly much research about Romani and genetics, or Roma and genetics. My frustration with the research was that they never distinguished between the different groups. So there were communities where we know, it's in Bulgaria, where we know there are 4 different groups that coexist, and they don't intermarry normally, and they don't tell you from which group they are. So that, and
you mean 4 different groups of Roma, different populations?
yeah, like you have Rudaris and Kalderash and Buguji or something like that in the same city. But if they just say, yeah, we found 100 people who voluntarily gave their DNA through so those methods that they use, you don't really know what they do. They did find clearly in all cases that they had a strong connection with India, which we linguists, of course, have known for many centuries, because Romani is so closely related to Indic languages that this was not a surprise at all. On the other end, there were also people who denied the Indic connection. So we had some discussions with them, and they said, no, they are just Dutch people who somehow picked up some Sanskrit words and pretend to be different, and then when they intermarry, they become a distinctive group, which is not in line with what we know from genetics. So that's a clear conclusion that the DNA is quite close to Indian populations, and also you can track down some of the migrations also, like Persian influence, so groups along the way of the migration from India to Europe. I also want to mention that I have quite a few traveler friends in Sweden, and they look more like Swedes than Roma. And one of them had a problem with his eyes, and he went to the doctor, and he looks Swedish. It's very strange, because this thing that you only find that in Asian populations. And then he said, I know why. He said, so you do find that, but I know that there are lots of people who in Sweden especially who do these genetic tests, and some of them also who did not know that they were Travellers or Roma, who discovered that through their test, because some of their relatives appear to be Travellers.
So here, what comparative linguistics, I mean, you started before by saying how maybe comparative linguistics has become a bit old-fashioned, but what comparative linguistics was able to tell us 250 years ago, so in the late 1700s, and come to the conclusion by looking at the language, has now turned out to be quite accurate, given that we now have a completely different science that is looking at the evidence from their side and confirming that hypothesis now. Let's move on to another area, but staying with that aspect of comparative linguistics. Again, you cited the professor then saying, well, comparative linguistics is a bit old-fashioned. And I guess some of it, so the more philological part, the part that deals with ancient languages and their relations, has perhaps become a bit old-fashioned, although we have recently have another interview in this series where we talked about the Indo-European languages and so on. So it remains an interesting topic. But there are other ways to compare languages in linguistics that are perhaps still in fashion, or even particularly in fashion and modern, such as the concept of linguistic typology, which is something that you've looked at and you've been interested in regard to, well, as you mentioned at the beginning, a range of different languages of North America that you've looked at, Basque, other languages of other parts of the world. So tell us, first of all, a little bit, before we get to a couple of cases, perhaps in Romani, what is linguistic typology? How does it relate? What does it compare? In what way is it comparative?
Yeah. Well, whereas comparative linguists usually mostly look at in order to find out whether two languages are related, you mostly look at the lexicon, the words, and also grammar has to be somewhat similar, but it can also change, of course. Whereas typology looks at the structure of languages, and if you are not a linguist, you may not realize how incredibly diverse the languages of the world are. Languages like Chinese or Vietnamese, there you have one word with one meaning, and you can make sentences. You do not have endings for expressing time. You do not say walk, good, walked. You use something like been, walk. And that is one type of language that you can call analytic or isolating. Then you may have languages where everything is expressed in endings, like in Turkish. You have you say this stem, and then you add something. Hey, this is present tense, and then you add this is the first person, that is me. So I. That would be just one word. If you say I am walking, that would be one word in a language like Turkish.
Well, in Turkish, you can have an entire sentence in one word, can't you? I think there's a few
Yeah, that's yeah.
Are you one of those that we haven't been able to convert to become Turkish?
For instance, yeah, that could be
famous
one
example.
word.
That's all in one word.
Yeah, and as all these little meanings are glued together, they call it a agglutinative language. This type. So you can have you can have long words, but each of these little parts has a special meaning.
So I wonder if it's also a gluten-free language.
Yeah.
Well, Um, so this is looking at languages wholesale, like their type of structure. But we can also do a typology of particular structures in language. And
Yes.
you've looked at the typology of Romani numerals.
Yeah.
That's quite extraordinary. I mean, numerals, what one doesn't think necessarily of numerals as being particularly outstanding in their relevance to the
No.
grammar or lexicon of a language, but we sort of take for granted that most languages have them in some form or other. What's interesting about Romani numerals and what kind of patterns do we find?
Yeah. Well, the strange thing is that for most languages, it's quite stable. You would not find dialects where the numbers 1 to 10 in English, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., where people suddenly use a different word for 8 or 9.
Well, we do in English, we have, 2 second. So there's 3/3,
Yes,
fourth, but 2 seconds. So that we have
that's true. That's true.
anomalies here and there, don't we? Yeah. But
Yeah,
they're rare. They're kind of in the fringe. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. But for Romani, it appeared that there were. I looked at the whole range of dialects. So how do you express 1 to 10, and also the numbers higher than that? And then it appears that some dialects do different things with the numerals. Okay, there's one thing which is universal in Romani, that the numbers 7, 8, and 9 are not from an Indic language. There's not a single Romani dialect where these are not Greek or something else. And you find them also borrowed from, I think, from Finnic languages in some of the dialects in the north. And what other people have done is they may have lost 8, but then they say 2 times 4 for 8. So there were a whole bunch of new processes to make these numerals. And also, I think that one of the things that I could say that I discovered, so there is this thing in basically all dialects of Romani, that you distinguish between the original words and borrowings. So you get different endings in adjectives and verbs and nouns for borrowed words than for the original words. And then actually,
yes, you identified those endings as deriving from Greek, right? So they would have come from the period of contact with Greek when that pattern first came into being.
Yeah. So So basically, the pattern of using the new type of grammar was based on what Greek does with borrowing. So they took over the borrowing pattern from Greek, and maybe not all people who watch this know that, but there is a considerable number of Greek words in Romani that are shared by all dialects. So that is there was a period where the whole ancestral population of today's Roma were living in a Greek-speaking area. But it appeared actually the same with the numerals, because you have the only numerals that have 2 syllables are those borrowed from Greek, and they also inflect a little bit differently. That was probably my contribution. Also, the higher number numerals, there were some interesting things. There is another thing, that is the borrowing. Also in the higher numerals, like 40, 50, 60, some of them are also from Greek, but when they are borrowed, it always starts with the highest one. So like 90, 80, 70. That is probably has to do with the frequency. If you do not use the Romani numerals on a daily basis, but you use them, for instance, for economic transactions in the local language, then you use a different numeral for that, and then you think, okay, well, what was 90 in Romani? You don't know it anymore, so you you use a different numeral.
But quite often you have forms such as 4 times 10, 5 times 10. Are those likely to be later creations? So would you imagine that Romani first borrowed the Greek terms for all of those numerals, but then later individual dialect renewed them? Or is that perhaps the older pre-Greek form, or do we know it all? Is there any way to tell?
I think they are pre-Greek. Yeah, there was a not okay. I have to say also, people may think that all languages have numerals from 1 to septillion, but that's not the case. There are also groups, mainly hunter-gatherers, who do not count to much more than maybe 3, and then after that everything is many. But I'm pretty convinced that the early form of Romani that came into Europe had a whole set of numerals, but then individual dialects may have lost some of them and have recreated them or using the resources of what Romani could offer, like half 100 for 50, or borrowing them from Greek.
Yeah. But actually we have that interestingly in European languages as well. So famously, if you're learning French, if that's not your language, you have to get used to, up from a certain point, you also count in multipliers. 5 times 20. And it's a famous difference between French of France and French in Belgium, for example. Does it differently. And then if you're learning Danish, even if you know a closely related language like Swedish, it gets you confused because all of a sudden you have half 60 or something, or 30 is 60, or very things that are so there's quite an odd is there any mapping, is there a kind of a regional distribution of these kind of patterns, and do Romani dialects fit into that distribution in any way?
Oh, I don't think it fits in, but it's kind of a normal thing for languages to change. Not so much in Europe, because there's a whole literary tradition which has a conserving influence on the languages. But most of the numeral systems are based on 10, and that's because we have 10 fingers. So after 10, you start a new counting system, like 10 plus 1, or 11 is actually from 1 leave. So and 12 is from 12 leave, and then you start 3 plus 10. But these numerals can also be renewed by going from a 10 system to a 20 system, and that has also happened in Danish, because the word for 20 is actually 2 times 10, but the word for 40 is 2. It's also 4 times 10. But 60 is 3 times 20. Yeah, it's very confusing to learn the Danish counting system.
Yeah, 80 is half 40, right? Which is, you think, is kind of the other way around.
Yeah, actually, it's like you say, it's okay. In England, you can say half 3, but it could mean, I think, 2:30 and 3:30, isn't it?
Depending on England, half 3 is half past 3. And half 3 is half past 2.
Yeah, but the system in Danish is a little bit like you say halfway through the next part of 20. So you say, it's a crazy system, and the people on the Faroe Islands have even taken it over from the Danes.
Right. So what we can learn from that is that there are different ways of conceptualizing the relations between numerals and numbers when counting. And if we find a language with so many dialects that are so geographically dispersed and open to the influence of other languages we do in Romani, then we can expect to find an array of different strategies. So staying with typology and staying a little bit also with counting in a way, another thing that you've compared across Romani dialects is the names of coins.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm sure that archaeologists have looked at that in various contexts, but I think this was the first study that I've ever read about coin names, and it was quite fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that. Why? First of all, why is it interesting to study coin names?
Yeah.
Did you learn anything about like socioeconomic history from that, and what are the kind of strategies or differences or types that we find in Romani coin names?
Well, this also started with Basque Romani because they have a number of names for coins in Basque Romani, and then I saw the same names used also in other varieties of Romani, and I thought, where do they actually come from? And the strange thing was also that they had different meanings in the different varieties of Romani. There is a set of around 5 or 6 terms that recur in many dialects, but it's very different from what people normally do. If I travel to, Denmark does not have the euro, but if I go to Germany, I say €6 or whatever, and I do not say 6 crowns for something. But that seems to have happened with the Romanis, because these terms for the coins, they are all from Bohemia in the 1600s, where they had terms like Groschen. It still existed in Austria when I was young, and Heller. It's actually from the town Halle in Germany, and that still exists, I think, in the Czech Republic. At least when I was there, they also had Hellers, and these coin names were taken apparently from there to all over Western Europe, to Wales, to England, to Scandinavia, to Spain, to the Basque Country.
You mean taken specifically by Roma or also other languages?
Yeah, no doubt about that, because they are not used by others. But then you have the small coins and the not so small coins, and they use the value of these coins to compare them with the local coins. And for a penny, for instance, in England, they would use the coin name with the lowest value, and then shilling is the one of a somewhat higher value. So the names of the coins are copied to the local currency. And I have not encountered that. Okay, I'm not a specialist in coin names only for these Romani coins, but I cannot imagine that something like that happens in other areas where you move to another place, but you maintain a set of coin names that you already have and implement them on the local coins rather than borrowing them. Let's say this is €4 or.
So what you're saying is that the Romani people adopted a set of coin names in Central Europe.
Yeah.
And then as they either migrated or were in contact with other Romani groups, those names were carried over, and those names were applied to the currency, to the local currencies, even though the local people had other names for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can think of a slight parallel in Israel in the 1970s. The currency was changed to basically camouflage inflation. So it was called lira before, as other currencies. It was changed to shekel, which is a biblical term. And people started using the term shekel, but I remember that the Palestinian population for a long time continued to call it lira.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that
Yeah,
was
but okay.
it's a
And
certain
how did
kind
they
of
do that?
parallel, but it's still referred to continuity rather than
Yeah.
using a. So it's
Yeah.
it's in a way it's the opposite perhaps. It's the resistance of new terms
Yeah.
rather than that. But that's interesting. So we learned first of all about some kind of socioeconomic impact that the Romani population in Central Europe in that time, in that particular period, had. And we also learn about the networking of Romani
Yeah.
population as far as the social, as their economics are concerned.
Yeah.
And we also learn about some kind of internal language resilience that they kept to their own system. And maybe that also has to do with camouflaging. Is that possible too? Because if
It
you're
could.
using the local currency names, then people know what you're saying, even if
Yeah.
they don't understand your language, maybe.
That's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also that, as you also suggest, but not directly, that these people all the way from Scandinavia to Spain, I think they had some kind of network of contact for a long time, where this conserving the coin names was a good strategy to have. Yeah.
And that's again amazing because it tells us something about, what language can reveal about social history. So
Yeah.
the theme comes up, of course, again and again, that as linguists, our community, our science was the first to establish the Indian origin through language, and now it's
Yeah.
confirmed by DNA. On the other hand, we know that Roma are very much integrated because we see in their language so many influences from the surrounding languages. Obviously, if they refuse to
Yeah.
integrate, as some people think they do, then they would not have vocabulary from their other languages,
Exactly.
even to the extent of intermarriage. So if Para-Romani really emerged through intermarriage, then they were semi-assimilated.
Yeah.
And we also learn about these interesting economic networks that transcended the whole of Europe, and that's really fascinating. Well, let's toward concluding this section, and before I hand back to Anastasia, I just want to ask you about the something that you mentioned before. So the language of travelers, you alluded to the Scandinavian travelers, and I use the English term travelers, but of course there's different local terms that are used. Sometimes, quite often, it's the translation, right? Resande or resende in Danish, so which actually means travelers. What do we know about their language and the vocabulary, rather, that they use, and does it have connections to Romani?
You think specifically of Denmark,
Danish. I'm
or
speaking now of the Danish travelers.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
because
the
not much is known. I mean, the language of the Norwegian and the Swedish
yeah.
travelers have been studied. And we also had one of our interviews with Jakob Widna. He told us quite a bit about his study of Norwegian, Para-Romani
Yeah.
in particular. But I'm thinking specifically of Danish because I think that you're the only one who's written about this, and there's very little actually known about the language of Danish travelers. So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
do we know about that?
I knew that it existed because there are a couple of articles by a Danish scholar, Johan Misko, in the 1920s, and he published that in Danish journals. And I've been looking for descendants of these people in Denmark. And I encountered one not long after I arrived in Denmark. So there was a caravan standing at some place, and it said "Sensieske," and in Dutch that means yeah, that's a job that my grandfather used to do. That is removing the sand from the sea and put it somewhere else in order to make harbors accessible again.
Yeah.
But it actually means truth sayer. So it was not they were not.
What the Americans called psychic in Manhattan and San Francisco.
Yeah, but
The fortune
it's
teller, basically.
yeah, fortune teller. Yes, and so I I knocked on this the door of this caravan, and she appeared to be a traveler. And then I went back with these articles. I said, oh yeah, this is, and so she knew all these people, but she said the language is gone, and she's basically the only traveler that I met in Denmark who remembered something of these families and said the language is gone. But then there is this guy, a very interesting guy. He died a couple of years ago, and when I met him, he was already in his 90s. He used to be a policeman in Copenhagen, but he didn't like handing out fines and things like that. And then he found this caravan camp in the middle of the city, and he made friends with them. And these were Travellers and Roma, and they became good friends. And he has also published several books about not only the travelers, but also the circus, because many of the travelers also worked in the circus. And very strange from a Swedish Norwegian perspective, also a book about the genealogy of all these families. And they loved it. When I visited him, he had this copy of the book, and then people phone him all the time. No, this person also has a cousin, and you have to add him. So he had on almost every page he had notes about other traveler families. And his name is Anastasiia, and he told me, yeah, I've made Romani recordings, and you can find them in this archive in Copenhagen. So I went there, and I also got this was in the semi-digital age, so I got these CDs with the recordings that he made, which were about linguistics. And there were, that is the only real source we have after these articles by Johan Misko, actually only sound recordings.
And what sort of language is it then?
That's it's kind of Danish Romani, but there's also a lot of German influence. And the thing is that I'm not sure whether it's the same language as Misko, because actually this the traveler married a Sinti woman, and it could be that they made their own family language. But it's not super rich, but it's the recording is around an hour or something like that, and I transcribed it at the time. But I've given the paper on it, but I forgot about it. Maybe I should write
absolutely. Here we go. Here's an opportunity to
thank you for reminding me.
And we've got a fascinating thread now from comparative linguistics to general, and all the way to a kind of in genetics, and all the way to the kind of a linguistic archaeology of the last speaker of this and last speaker of that. Wonderful. So this is a note to end this part on, and I'll hand back to Anastasiia. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, such a nice conversation. And yeah, as a conclusion, we'd like to ask you, from your perspective, what still needs to be explored in the Romani linguistics, and some words about your personal goals, what you'd still like to achieve in this field.
Oh yeah, well, as you know, I did many different languages, and I think in 2015 I got a big project on Creole languages, and then I said I cannot keep up with Romani linguistics anymore, so I more or less retired from that. But there are. So I have not followed what is going on basically in Romani linguistics since 2015, but I used to try to get to be informed. So that's also why we made this bibliography of Romani a kind of a small summary in keywords of everything published in the preceding century. So I cannot give you an answer about what has to be done in Romany. Of course, documentation also of these mixed varieties. Maybe try to find out where they are emerging right now. So there are some signals from Italy and Hungary that similar things are happening right now, and that's of course fantastic in the sense that we are not we do not have to rely on documents, but we can also watch it happen. Yeah. And for me personally, as I said, I retired, but I do still do a couple of things. So for academic, I do some refereeing when you get an article and you read it, whether it's good enough for publication. And but there are a couple of things I still do. There's this traveler journal, Drabrikan, and I regularly contribute to that. It's a really fantastic journal. It's online, but you have to be able to read Swedish because everything is in Swedish. But talking about Sweden, and also we were talking about that my interest in older sources.
Hope we will have these materials in English. Either we could translate them to get acquainted.
Yeah, but there are a number of really travelers who are really interested also in their history. So they do archival research, and then they found some of my friends are trying to do a biography of a woman called Anna Maria Adam's daughter. So in that time you would add daughter, so you do not have a fixed family name, and she was quite special because they found things in the archives for a long period. But the interesting thing for the linguist is that in 1709 she was quoted in Romany in the court. And I cannot quote it here because it could upset some people, but she was in any case really angry and she used some really bad words, and they were written down in Romany, and the clerk who wrote it down says, we cannot put it here in Swedish, meaning that he understood what the intention was, what the meaning was, but the words were too bad. But and that is something we wrote an article about, but my traveler friends, they found it too technical because I tried to find the what kind of stage it was in. Was it the para-Romani or was it the old Romani? Was it Sinti or was it something else? And the conclusion is not really clear, unfortunately, but these 4 or 5 sentences are the only thing we have from that time. And yeah, there are, I feel also obliged to, there were also a couple of sentences from Estonia in a dialect of Romani, of which all the speakers were killed in the Second World War, Laiusa Romani. And I have a long manuscript which I should finish about the place of that dialect. And talking about the war, that's also something that I want to do at some point in time. And that is the Dutch Sinti in the Second World War. There were not many of them, maybe 250 who were arrested on one day, and they were taken to the concentration camps, and only around 10% of them came back. And as my father had a similar history, I feel very much connected to that. So I have okay, and this was a taboo to talk about. Generally, you would not talk about the war experience, whether you were in the resistance or you were just an ordinary citizen or you were in a concentration camp. People would not talk about that in the Netherlands. And that's especially the case for Sinti because of their spiritual beliefs that you do not talk about people who have passed away. And but in recent years also the Sinti themselves have started to now often also second generation, of course, to write about these memories. There are also some film fragments, and I think I have now collected everything there is, and this is very difficult to do because there are so many sensitivities, and I would like to do something with all that material that has been written and filmed. Yeah, so these are my own future plans for Romani linguistics. I'm not really retired, but I have some current projects and future projects to continue with Romani.
And we wish you a lot of success and looking forward for the result of your projects.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, very much for this interview. It was really interesting, fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And thank everyone for being with us and watching the interview. We are looking forward for your comments. Subscribe to the channel and see you next time in our new episode. Bye for now.